Put 2 fingers on the side of your neck, just under the jaw, and find the pulse. Count it for 15 seconds and multiply by 4. Remember that number. Now the next time you finish a proper meal, a real one, plate cleared, do the same thing 20 minutes later. Count again. It will be faster. Not by a lot, 5 beats a minute, maybe 10, maybe 15 if the meal was large. You did not stand up, you did not climb anything. You sat in a chair and ate, and your heart quietly changed gear. Almost nobody notices this, because the change is small and the body is built to hide it. You feel a little heavy, a little slow, maybe pleasantly sleepy after a big lunch, and you put that down to the food. The food is only part of it. What you are feeling is a redistribution of blood happening across your whole body, and the organ running that redistribution is the heart, which has just been handed one of the hardest jobs it does all day. We are taught that digestion is a job for the stomach and the gut. It is also a job for the circulation, and a demanding one. Eating does not just occupy your digestive tract. It reorganizes where your blood goes, how fast your heart beats, what your blood pressure does, and how much oxygen your heart muscle has to burn to keep everything supplied. All of that starts within minutes of the first mouthful and runs for the next hour or two, whether you are aware of it or not. The person who has just eaten and settled onto the sofa thinks the work is over. The chewing is over. The circulatory work has just begun, and the heart is in the middle of it. Here is the shape of what is about to happen. Your gut is about to place an enormous order for blood, larger than almost any other single organ demand in ordinary daily life. Your heart has to fill that order without letting the supply to your brain and your muscles collapse. To do it, the heart speeds up and pumps harder, which raises its own need for oxygen, right at the moment when the blood that feeds the heart itself is being pulled in competing directions. For most people, most of the time, the system handles all of this so smoothly that the only evidence is a slightly faster pulse and a bit of drowsiness. For some people, and in some situations, it does not handle it smoothly, and that is when eating turns into dizziness, a fall, or a squeeze of pain in the chest. Everything from here is what actually goes on in that hour, why it goes on, who it catches out, and what you can do about the size of the load. My grandmother had a rule she never explained. After a big meal, you sat. You did not leap up and start clearing the table. You did not rush out of the door, and you certainly did not go straight into the cold water at the beach. You sat, and you let your food settle, and she would look sideways at anyone who bolted their lunch and sprang up. She could not have told you a word about splanchnic blood flow or cardiac output. She had watched enough people go pale and unsteady after standing up too fast from the dinner table to know that the hour after eating asks something of the body, and that the sensible thing was to give the body room to answer it. Start where the demand comes from. Start with the gut. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Swallow a mouthful of food and you set off a supply problem that has to be solved in minutes. Absorbing a meal is expensive. The lining of your small intestine has to pull sugars, amino acids, fats, water, and salts out of the gut and move them across into the blood, and that work needs fuel and oxygen delivered to the gut wall, and it needs somewhere for all the absorbed nutrients to go. Both of those require one thing: blood, a lot of it, moving fast, right to the digestive tract. The circulation that feeds your stomach, intestines, liver, spleen, and pancreas has a name: the splanchnic circulation. At rest, between meals, it already takes a sizable share of everything the heart pumps, somewhere around a quarter of your entire cardiac output, flowing quietly through the gut, even when there is nothing to digest. Then you eat, and that share climbs. The main pipe supplying the small intestine is the superior mesenteric artery, a single vessel branching off the front of the aorta and fanning out into the gut. Kamar and Reed, working in the 1980s, put Doppler ultrasound on that artery and measured what happened to the flow through it after a meal. It roughly doubled. Blood flow through the superior mesenteric artery rose to about twice its fasting level, climbing over the first half hour, peaking somewhere between 30 and 90 minutes after eating, and staying elevated for a couple of hours while absorption ran. Sit with the size of that. A single artery to a single region of the body doubles its blood supply on demand, 3 times a day, every day, purely because you had a meal. There is almost nothing else in ordinary life that produces a blood flow shift that large without you moving a muscle on purpose. The amount it climbs depends on what you ate. A carbohydrate-heavy meal drives one of the largest responses, because sugars are absorbed fast and the gut works hard and quick to move them. Fat produces a slower, more prolonged rise, because fat takes longer to process. A small glass of water barely moves it. The bigger the meal, and the richer it is, the larger the order the gut places, and the longer it keeps the blood. And this is where the problem starts, because that blood has to come from somewhere. Your total blood volume is only about 5 liters. You do not manufacture an extra liter a minute to hand to the gut. Every drop the digestive tract pulls in is a drop that is not, at that moment, going somewhere else. The gut has effectively put in a request for a third more of the total supply, and the rest of the body still needs feeding. The brain will not tolerate a drop in its supply. It is the least patient organ you own, and a fall in blood flow to the brain shows up within seconds as lightheadedness and within a bit longer as a faint. The working muscles need their share. The kidneys need theirs. And now the gut wants a large extra pour on top of all of it. The heavy, drowsy feeling after a big lunch is the mild, everyday face of this competition. Blood is being committed to the gut, the rest of the body is running on a slightly tighter supply, and the brain registers it as a pull toward the sofa. It is usually harmless, and it passes. It is also a small, felt signal that a real redistribution is underway, one you can notice in your own body, if you pay attention to the hour after a large meal. There is only one structure in the body that can resolve a competition like this: the pump. The heart has to increase the total amount of blood in circulation per minute so that the gut can have its extra share without the brain and the muscles losing theirs. The order has been placed. The gut wants its blood. What does the heart do to fill it? The heart has 2 levers, and after a meal it pulls both. The amount of blood your heart delivers per minute, its cardiac output, is simply how much it ejects per beat, multiplied by how many times it beats per minute. Push either number up, and the total goes up. After a meal, both go up together. Heart rate rises first and most visibly. This is the faster pulse you counted in the first chapter. The nervous system reads the falling resistance in the gut and the rising demand and signals the heart to beat more often. The rise is usually modest, a handful of beats per minute after a light meal, more after a heavy one, but it is consistent, and it is measurable, and it is the single easiest piece of postprandial cardiac work to feel with your own fingers. The force of each beat can rise too. The heart contracts a little harder and moves a little more blood per stroke. Put the two together, more beats and stronger beats, and the total output climbs. Across a range of studies measuring cardiac output after eating, the increase commonly lands somewhere in the region of 1/5 to 1/3 above the fasting level, tracking the size of the meal. The heart is now doing appreciably more work than it was doing an hour earlier, and the only thing that changed is that you ate. None of this is free, and here is the cost that matters. Heart muscle, like every muscle, needs oxygen to do work, and it gets that oxygen from its own dedicated blood supply running through the coronary arteries on the surface of the heart. The harder the heart works, the more oxygen it burns, and there is a simple, well-established way to estimate how much oxygen the heart is demanding at any moment. You multiply the heart rate by the systolic blood pressure. Cardiologists call it the rate pressure product, and it rises and falls almost exactly in step with how much oxygen the heart muscle is consuming. After a meal, heart rate is up. That pushes the rate pressure product up, which means the oxygen demand of the heart muscle itself has risen for the whole hour or two that the gut is being supplied. The heart is not a bystander in digestion, quietly pumping the same as always while the gut does the interesting work. It is a participant that has taken on extra load, sped itself up, raised its own fuel bill, and committed to running at that higher rate until absorption is done. Put a number on the lifetime of it. Say a meal adds 10 beats a minute for an hour. That is 600 extra beats for that one meal. 3 meals a day is 1800 extra beats every day, spent entirely on digestion. Across a year, that is roughly 2/3 of a million extra contractions. Across the decades of an adult life, it runs into the tens of millions of beats, an entire body of cardiac work, performed for no reason other than that food arrived and had to be absorbed. In a healthy heart with clean arteries, this is completely fine. The coronary arteries widen to deliver the extra oxygen, the demand is met, and the whole thing passes without a symptom. The system was built for exactly this, 3 times a day, for a lifetime. The trouble only appears when the supply cannot rise to meet the demand, or when the pressure that is supposed to hold everything steady does not hold. And the pressure problem comes first, because filling the gut's order creates a problem the heart did not have a moment ago. My grandmother watched a cousin of hers stand straight up from Sunday dinner, sway, and grab the back of the chair. She said he had got up too quick after eating and told him to sit back down for a minute. She was describing, without any of the words, exactly the problem the next chapter is about. To give the gut its extra blood, the body has to open the vessels feeding the gut, widen them, drop their resistance, let more flow through. That is how the splanchnic circulation takes its largest share. But blood pressure is produced by 2 things working together: the force of the pump and the resistance of the vessels the blood is being pushed through. Open a large bed of vessels wide, drop its resistance, and you have removed part of what was holding the pressure up. If nothing compensates, blood pressure falls. So the act of feeding the gut is also by itself a force pushing your blood pressure down. A large volume of blood is pooling into a newly widened splanchnic circulation, and the pressure in the rest of the system wants to sag. In a healthy body, a reflex catches it before you ever notice. The baroreflex, the automatic pressure control system, senses the sag instantly and responds by tightening blood vessels elsewhere in the body and nudging the heart faster, which is part of why the heart rate rises after eating in the first place. The gut gets its blood, the pressure elsewhere is defended, and the 2 balance out. You feel nothing but a little drowsiness. The balance depends entirely on that reflex working well and fast, and in a lot of people it does not. As people get older, the baroreflex slows and weakens. The compensation that should be instant becomes sluggish and incomplete. Add certain conditions that damage the automatic nervous system, and the reflex may barely respond at all. In those people, the meal opens the gut vessels, the pressure sags, and nothing rises quickly enough to catch it. Blood pressure drops and stays dropped. This has a name and a definition. Postprandial hypotension, a fall in systolic blood pressure of at least 20 points within 2 hours of eating. Lipsitz and colleagues documented it clearly in older adults in the New England Journal of Medicine back in 1983, and it has been confirmed many times since. It is common in the elderly, common in people with Parkinson's disease and other conditions affecting the automatic nervous system, and common in people whose blood pressure is already unstable. The symptoms are exactly what you would expect when the brain's blood supply dips. Lightheadedness after a meal, a feeling of weakness or a need to sit down. Blurred vision, unsteadiness, sometimes a faint. In older people, this is a genuine cause of falls, and a fall in an older person is never a small event, because it leads to the fracture, the hospital, the loss of independence. A meal, of all things, can be the trigger. The size of the drop tracks the meal. A large meal produces a bigger fall than a small one, because a bigger meal opens the splanchnic vessels wider and holds more blood there. And carbohydrate is the strongest driver of all. A meal high in fast carbohydrate produces the sharpest post-meal pressure fall, which is why a heavy, sugary lunch is more likely to leave a vulnerable person swaying than a small, balanced one. There is a second version of this that has been known for over a century, and it comes from the other direction, from the stomach pressing, rather than the vessels opening. A very full stomach, distended with a large meal, sits directly beneath the diaphragm and can press upward against the heart. Ludwig Röhmheld described this in the early 1900s, and it still carries his name, the gastrocardiac syndrome. In some people, a very full stomach produces palpitations, breathlessness, or a fluttering, uncomfortable awareness of the heart, purely from mechanical pressure and the nerve traffic a stretched stomach sends out. It is usually harmless and it eases as the stomach empties, but it is a real reminder that the heart and the full gut are neighbors, separated by a thin sheet of muscle, and that a large meal makes its presence felt against the heart in more ways than one. So the pressure problem is real, and for the vulnerable it is the main event. But there is a more serious version that has nothing to do with pressure falling, and everything to do with the heart's own oxygen supply failing to keep up with the demand a meal creates. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Go back to the rate pressure product from Chapter 3. After a meal, the heart's oxygen demand rises. In a healthy heart, the coronary arteries widen and the extra oxygen is delivered. The demand is met. Now put a narrowing in one of those coronary arteries. A coronary artery furred with atherosclerotic plaque cannot widen the way a clean one can. It is already partly blocked, and the amount of blood it can carry has a ceiling. At rest, that ceiling might be high enough. The heart is not asking for much, and even a narrowed artery can supply a resting heart. The problem appears the moment demand rises above what the narrowed artery can deliver. A meal raises demand, the heart speeds up, the oxygen requirement climbs, and the coronary artery is asked to deliver more. If the artery is narrowed and cannot deliver more, the heart muscle downstream of the narrowing runs short of oxygen. Muscle starved of oxygen produces pain. In the heart, that pain is angina. This is why some people with coronary disease get chest tightness or pain not only when they climb stairs, but after a large meal. It is called postprandial angina, and the mechanism is the same as exertional angina. Demand rose above what the supply could meet. The difference is only that the thing raising demand was digestion instead of a flight of steps. To a narrowed coronary artery, a big dinner and a hill look much alike. Both ask the heart for more oxygen than the artery can carry. There is a plausible reason a very large meal might squeeze the supply from the other side as well. When the gut is demanding its large postprandial share of blood, and the heart is working harder to provide it, the overall circulatory situation is one of high demand across the whole system, and a heart with a fixed, limited coronary supply is being asked to do more precisely when the body's blood is being redistributed. The heart's need is up and its margin is thin. This is not a reason for a healthy person to fear their dinner. A normal heart handles the post-meal load every day without the faintest problem, and has done for your whole life. But it does explain something that has been noticed in the data. Large, heavy meals appear to act, in vulnerable people, as a trigger for cardiac events. A case crossover study looking at first heart attacks found that a heavy meal was associated with a raised risk of an acute coronary event in the couple of hours afterward. It is one study on one kind of event, and the absolute risk to any individual meal is very small. But the direction fits the mechanism precisely. The period of highest cardiac demand after a large meal is the period when a heart with a marginal supply is most likely to be tipped over its limit. There is one more layer, and it is about the blood itself rather than the pump. After a fatty meal, the blood is briefly loaded with fat, a state called postprandial lipemia, and that state does something measurable to the arteries. Vogel and colleagues in the American Journal of Cardiology in 1997 fed healthy people a single high-fat meal and then measured how well their arteries could dilate. The ability of the arteries to widen dropped for hours afterward. One fatty meal, and the lining of the blood vessels, the endothelium, temporarily lost some of its ability to relax and open. Alongside this, the hours after a rich meal carry a transient tilt of the blood toward being slightly more inflammatory and more prone to clotting. None of that is a catastrophe after any single meal in a healthy person. It resolves, the arteries recover, the blood settles. But it is the same event, repeated 3 times a day, for decades, on the inside of arteries that are also slowly accumulating the damage of a lifetime. The hour after eating is not neutral for the blood vessels. It is a period of mild, recoverable strain, and how rich and how large the meals are decides how much strain, how often. Which brings the whole thing to the practical question. If the size and the richness of the meal set the size of the load, what are the levers you actually control? 4 things decide how heavy the hour after eating is, and 3 of them are entirely in your hands. The first and largest is meal size. Everything in this video scales with it. A big meal places a big order for splanchnic blood, drives a bigger rise in cardiac output, produces a bigger fall in blood pressure in those prone to it, and demands more oxygen from the heart for longer. A small meal does all the same things at a fraction of the magnitude. The single most effective thing anyone can do to lighten the post-meal load on the heart is to make the largest meals smaller. A vulnerable person who splits one enormous dinner into 2 modest meals has cut the size of the single biggest circulatory event of their day roughly in half. The second is composition. Fast carbohydrate produces the sharpest blood pressure fall and one of the largest flow responses. Fat produces the longest-lasting rise in gut blood flow and the transient hit to the arteries. A meal built around protein, fiber, and slower carbohydrate produces a gentler, more spread-out response than the same number of calories delivered as sugar and refined starch. The point is not that any food is forbidden. The point is that the shape of the post-meal load follows the composition of the plate, and a balanced plate produces a flatter, kinder curve than a sugary one. The third is timing, and it works through the clock inside your body. The same meal eaten in the evening lands in a body whose blood pressure control and metabolic handling are running differently than they are at midday. Evening and night are when postprandial hypotension tends to bite hardest, and a very large late meal eaten shortly before lying down combines the biggest circulatory load with the position that makes reflux and pressure problems worse. Shifting the largest meal of the day earlier and keeping the evening plate lighter means the heaviest circulatory work is done when the body is best equipped to handle it. The fourth is the one you do not control, and it is worth naming honestly so you can weigh the other 3 properly. Age and health set your starting margin. A young person with a fast barrow reflex and clean coronary arteries absorbs the entire post-meal load without a flicker. An older person with a slow reflex, or anyone with coronary narrowing, is working with less margin, and the same meal costs them more. You cannot change your age or undo established heart disease by managing your meals, but the narrower your margin, the more the 3 levers you do control actually matter, because you are managing a load that your body can no longer absorb quite so invisibly. That is the whole toolkit. Smaller, gentler, earlier. And there is one more thing, an action rather than a choice about the plate, that changes what the heart does in that hour, and it is the oldest piece of after-dinner advice there is. The advice to walk after a meal is in almost every culture that has one. The Italians call the after-dinner stroll the passeggiata. There is an old line about walking 100 steps after eating and living to 99. It is the thing grandmothers everywhere told children to do after a big meal, and for most of history nobody could say why it helped. The physiology can now say something about it. A gentle walk after eating is not the same as sitting still, and the difference runs through the same circulation this whole video has been about. When you walk, the muscles of your legs contract, and contracting leg muscles squeeze the veins running through them and push blood back up toward the heart. This is the calf muscle pump, and it is a real second engine for the circulation. After a meal, when a large volume of blood has pooled into the widened vessels of the gut, and the pressure elsewhere wants to sag, gentle movement of the legs helps keep blood returning to the heart and helps steady the circulation against the post-meal pressure drop. For someone prone to postprandial hypotension, a slow walk can blunt the very fall that would otherwise leave them lightheaded on the sofa. There is a second reason it helps, and it belongs to the metabolic side. Muscle that is gently working after a meal pulls sugar out of the blood to fuel itself, which lowers the post-meal blood sugar peak. A flatter sugar peak means less of the slow chemical damage that high sugar does to proteins and blood vessels over a lifetime. So the same easy walk that steadies the pressure also flattens the sugar, and both effects land on the cardiovascular system. The dose is small. This is a gentle walk, not a workout. 10 or 15 minutes of easy movement in the window after eating does the useful work. And even 2 or 3 minutes of standing and moving is better than dropping straight into a chair. The point is not to exert the heart harder on top of the meal. The point is light, rhythmic movement that helps the circulation manage the load it is already carrying. A few cautions that matter, because this video has described real problems. If you get chest pain, chest tightness, or breathlessness after meals, that is not something to walk off or manage with folk advice. It is a reason to see a doctor and have your heart looked at, because postprandial angina is a signal of coronary narrowing that needs proper assessment. If you get dizzy, weak, or faint after eating, that is worth reporting too, especially if you are older, because postprandial hypotension can be managed once it is recognized, and because the falls it causes are dangerous. The gentle walk and the smaller meal are for lightening an ordinary load. They are not a treatment for symptoms that are trying to tell you something. Go back to the pulse you counted at the very start. That small rise, 5 or 10 beats a minute after a meal, is the visible edge of everything this video has described. Behind it, the gut has doubled the blood flowing to a whole region of your body. The heart has raised its output by a fifth or more to supply it. The oxygen the heart itself burns has climbed. The blood pressure has been defended, or in the vulnerable has quietly fallen. The arteries, after a rich meal, have stiffened a little and will recover. And all of it runs for an hour or two, 3 times a day, and then resets, and does it again at the next meal, and the next, for as long as you eat. The heart does not rest when you rest after a meal. The hour after eating is the busiest routine shift it works, and it works that shift tens of millions of times across a life, entirely in the background, entirely unnoticed, asking nothing of you except that you not make the load larger than it needs to be. My grandmother made everyone sit for a while after a big meal, and then, before it got dark, she walked, not far and not fast, a slow turn around the garden or down the lane and back, every evening, the way the people she had grown up around had always done. She never called it exercise, and she never called it anything at all. She had simply watched, across a long life, that the people who ate enormous meals and dropped straight into a chair did worse than the people who ate a little less and moved a little after. The physiology took a century of Doppler probes and blood pressure cuffs to explain what she was doing. She had the practice long before anyone had the reason. Count your pulse after your next meal, then go for the walk. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.